Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching NewsX World. Let's first take a look at our top stories. A man and woman from Israel's embassy are shot dead outside a Gaza-focused event in downtown Washington, D.C. Police say the suspect shouted "Free Palestine" and is being probed for possible terror links. Israel calls it a shocking terrorist attack. Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar says European officials share blame for anti-Israel incitement that led to the embassy shooting in Washington. World leaders have condemned the killings as Trump says hatred and radicalism has no place in the USA. Palestinian officials say that some bread and baby food is reaching Gazans after 100 aid trucks were allowed into the enclave after an 11-week Israeli blockade. Local authorities say the aid is nowhere near enough as further Israeli strikes kill 35, according to Gaza medics. The Republican-controlled House of Representatives have passed a sweeping tax and spending bill by just a single vote. The bill, which would enact much of the president's policy agenda, will now head to the Senate. Moscow says it has intercepted 105 Ukrainian drones, including dozens targeting the capital Moscow as frontline fighting intensifies. Meanwhile, the Kremlin says that no further direct Russia-Ukraine peace talks are scheduled, almost a week on from a meeting in Istanbul. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi says Pakistan will not receive water from rivers India controls following a deadly attack in Kashmir. The move comes after India suspended a crucial water-sharing treaty, deepening tensions between the nuclear-armed neighbours. A small plane has crashed into a residential area of San Diego, setting several homes on fire. Police have warned people to avoid the area while it is currently unknown what caused the crash and whether anyone is injured. A UK High Court judge issues an injunction halting a sovereignty deal with Mauritius over the Chagos Islands. The move temporarily stalls plans to transfer control while preserving the future of Diego Garcia military base. Starting this hour as two Israeli embassy staffers known for their dedication to Israel-Palestine dialogue were fatally shot by a lone gunman in Washington, D.C. The attack occurred outside the Capitol Jewish Museum, just 1.3 miles from the White House. Washington Metropolitan Police Chief Pamela Smith confirmed the suspect, 30-year-old Elias Rodriguez from Chicago. The suspect opened fire with a handgun on a group of four, killing two people. Eyewitnesses saw him pacing nervously outside the museum before the shooting. While in custody, Rodriguez reportedly chanted "Free Palestine." Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu condemned the attack as a horrific anti-Semitic shooting, blaming ongoing anti-Semitism and incitement against Israel. Meanwhile, Israel has allowed 100 UN and international aid trucks into Gaza via the Kerem Shalom crossing. However, Antoine Renard, the country director of the World Food Programme, says none of this aid, that is a very limited number of trucks, has reached the Gaza population. With regard to the aid, Netanyahu further stressed the importance of preventing a humanitarian crisis while maintaining Israel's operational freedom in Gaza. He also mentioned that by the end of the ongoing offensive, all of the Gaza Strip will be under Israeli army control. He expressed willingness for a temporary ceasefire to secure the return of hostages, with 20 believed to be alive and up to 38 confirmed deceased. Well, joining us to discuss all of these developments is Peter Baum, foreign editor of the weekly Blitz, who is joining us in Israel. Peter, thank you ever so much for joining us. Of course, some disturbing and horrific scenes from Washington, D.C., amid, of course, international condemnation for the attack. Can I first just get your reaction to the shooting that took place and killed two members of staff from the Israeli embassy?
Yes, good day to you and your viewers. one of shock and horror, and yet not surprising, given the absurd rhetoric coming from very high profile politicians demonizing Netanyahu, the Jewish state of Israel, and Netanyahu's policies. This, we understand, is a lone wolf attack. To date, there is no information sources that I or any other colleagues have obtained that would suggest that the killer Elias Rodriguez was part of any terror group. This has yet to be firmly established by authorities, but this is the feedback that we're currently getting. What is so ironic about this attack, if it is a lone wolf attack, that the people killed on were part of, let's say, an Israeli-Palestinian peace dialogue organisation that were trying to unite the both sides and dilute the effect of the extremists. And it seems to me that an extremist not caring about the victims, just a random shooting, butchered two people who were in future and currently were part of a peace commitment towards the Israeli-Palestinian issue. It's quite ironic and quite shocking, but as I said, unsurprising.
Absolutely, Peter. Of course, the world has been shocked. Several world leaders, as I mentioned, of course, condemning the attack. Israel has called it blatant terrorism. But coming back to global leaders, there has seemed to have been a shift from certain leaders with more pressure being placed on Israel. How sort of pivotal is this international pressure in this incident here? We've heard Israel saying that European leaders have been complicit, giving their comments in recent days. Do you think there is a correlation between that attack and the condemnation that some world leaders are now putting on Israel for the ongoing conflict with Hamas?
Yes, I do think there's a correlation, but I also believe that the united effort by certain world leaders to put pressure on Netanyahu is more because of domestic policies those world leaders are facing. Each and every one of them has to face an ongoing barrage, exacerbated at weekends, of pro-Palestinian protests and marches which put their police forces, their fire services, their security forces under pressure week after week after week. And these world leaders, I believe, are frankly sick of it and want to put an end to it. They don't, because they're too afraid of the, let's say, the pro-Palestinian movement within their countries, and certainly they don't wish to offend the growing Muslim elements within their countries. So I think it's no coincidence that certain world leaders have combined to put added pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu and his government. Having said that, it's also apparent to any morally decent person that some of the rhetoric coming out of senior diplomats at the United Nations, such as Tom Fletcher, basically blood libels. The one about 14,000 plus babies will die of starvation. This kind of absurd rhetoric is bound to have an impact on the more extreme and unstable anti-Jewish elements, and we've seen that play out in Washington in the form of this madman, this lone wolf, carrying out this atrocity.
Yes, Peter, to bring an end to the discussion, I'm glad you brought up the points that have been made by diplomatic leaders, including at the UN, like Tom Fletcher. I want to look at the division that this conflict has caused across the world. It's something we've seen since the October 7th attacks of 2023. Of course, with Israeli hostages held and with displacement in Gaza, along with more than 50,000 deaths reported by local media and medical sources. Given the sensitivity over this, with both sides suffering immensely amidst hostages still being held by Hamas, how do you think that this escalation that we've seen today or overnight is avoided in the future? And what do diplomatic leaders have to do to be a part of that de-escalation in such a poignant and divisive topic, which is the Israel-Hamas war?
Yeah, I don't think that this conflict is going to de-escalate until such time as the current Israeli administration, should it survive, because don't forget there is also domestic pressure within Israel to bring an end to the war, but whilst Netanyahu is in power, I think he has one sole objective in mind, and that is to destroy Hamas militarily. Now, for your listeners and viewers, I'm informed by some very high-ranking sources that pressure is being put on behind the scenes on the Qataris and the Iranians to completely dilute Hamas militarily. They will retain a political presence, but militarily the objective is to defeat them. And I think Netanyahu, knowing this, has the confidence, despite the, let's say, isolationist rhetoric coming from allies, to continue on this path. The crux will come if Donald Trump himself and his US administration finally get fed up with the inability of the Netanyahu government to complete the task. For the time being, I don't know how many weeks that is, but let's be realistic, another 4 to 8 weeks. If Hamas still pose a military threat after that time, then I think the Trump administration will have no other option than to increase the pressure on Netanyahu, where it becomes apparent he will have to end the conflict.
Peter Baum, thank you ever so much for providing that insight. We will, of course, be across all of the developments in the Middle East. But we move on now, and in a significant development in the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict, the Kremlin has denied reports that it has agreed to peace talks with Ukraine in the Vatican. This comes after US media outlets suggested that discussions could be hosted in the Vatican as early as mid-June. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov clarified that no formal agreements had been made regarding such talks, and any future meetings remain unconfirmed. Last week, Russian and Ukrainian officials met face-to-face for the first time in more than 3 years in Istanbul, but the talks ended without an agreement on a ceasefire. Russian President Vladimir Putin has consistently rejected proposals for a 30-day truce and has instead suggested working on a broader yet vague memorandum outlining Russia's position. Meanwhile, the military situation on the ground remains intense. The Russian Defense Ministry reported that its forces shot down 105 Ukrainian drones, including dozens targeting Moscow. Moscow's mayor confirmed that nearly 40 drones were intercepted as they approached the Russian capital, briefly halting flights at major airports. On the front lines, fierce battles continue, particularly in the Donetsk region, where Russian forces claim advances are being made. Reports indicate that as the conflict enters its next year, Russia has seized substantial parts of Ukrainian territory, including Crimea, Luhansk, and portions of the Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions. In his latest address, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky highlighted the ongoing clashes around Pokrovsk, but refrained from confirming any territorial losses to Russia. Well, joining us to discuss these latest developments is Andrew Latham, Professor of International Relations at the Macalester College and a Senior Fellow, who's joining us from St. Paul, Minnesota, in the United States of America. Andrew, thank you ever so much for joining us. Let's first touch on these reports denied by the Kremlin that the next set of face-to-face talks between Russia and Ukraine have been organised. Given the fact that these talks in Turkey ended so swiftly and without a concrete resolution, what do you think comes next, specifically from Donald Trump and the US administration, which have played such a key part in these ongoing negotiations of peace between Russia and Ukraine?
There is so much theatrics involved here between the Ukrainian government, the Russian government, and the US government. It's almost unbelievable, except it's only too believable. Here's what's actually happening. The Russians are winning the war, incrementally, slowly, but they're winning, and therefore President Putin has zero incentive to actually agree to a ceasefire or a permanent peace agreement. President Zelensky is desperate, but that's not going to happen. And Trump, who really wants a Nobel Peace Prize more than anything else, I think, has tried to broker some kind of peace agreement, but he's trying to broker it on the basis of nothing that really matters. He can seduce Putin all he wants, but Putin knows what he wants. And what he wants is the 4 oblasts. He doesn't want to take over all of Ukraine. He wants Ukraine demilitarized and not in NATO, but he wants those 4 oblasts, and he's just about going to get them. Why in the world would he agree to any kind of ceasefire brokered by Trump and demanded by Zelensky? It's not going to happen.
Andrew, given that assumption, an opinion that you have then, which is shared by many experts, that Putin is delaying this conflict and delaying peace talks in order to continue the military gains that he's making. The European leaders have called for further sanctions. Ukraine, of course, have pushed for further moves. What's next needed from the Trump administration, who let's be honest, he stepped back away from these sanctions because he wants to keep the door open for Russia to agree to a deal. But if the case is that Russia's never going to agree, then what's next for these peace talks?
I'm not sure what's next for the peace talks. I don't think they're going anywhere. I think if we go up to 30,000 feet and we think about what Trump wants with respect to Russia, he wants a deal with Russia. Not about Ukraine, but he wants a deal that's going to sort of draw them away from China and, the reverse Nixon 1972 thing. And I'm being charitable here because I'm not sure that President Trump, I want to be respectful, I'm not sure that he actually thinks these things through in grand strategy terms, but I think that's his impulse. And I don't think that Ukraine matters all that much to him in that context. He's willing to throw Ukraine under the bus. He's willing to withdraw mostly from NATO around these issues. He's willing to push the European and Canadian NATO partners to actually up their game a little bit, and then he can pivot America's grand strategic sort of needs to the Indo-Pacific to deal with China. But I just don't see President Trump brokering any kind of peace deal because there's no peace deal on the table. The Russians are winning. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm saying it's a thing. The Russians are winning, and they're going to continue winning until they get everything that they want.
Yes, Andrew, and very briefly before we move on, I do want to touch on these strikes that Russia says they have reportedly downed 105 drones with dozens targeting Moscow. Very quickly, what's the significance of this level of drone strikes specifically targeting Moscow by Ukraine?
Well, I would say 2 things about that. One of which is this drone warfare thing is very new, and we're not sure how it's going to shake out ultimately. It is just a terrifically new sort of strategic development. As much as Russia uses drones against Ukraine and Ukraine uses drones against Russia, most of them get shot down. So there's some symbolic importance to these attacks, but for the most part, 90% of these drones get shot down by both sides. So at the end of the day, it's not like the evolution of nuclear weapons or strategic bombing in World War II or anything like that. It's just, it makes the news.
Yes, Andrew, you will be staying with us, and of course we will bring you all of the updates that we get from the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. But heading to North America now, and the Republican-controlled U.S. House of Representatives have passed a sweeping tax and spending bill by a single vote. This would enact much of President Donald Trump's policy agenda and saddle the country with trillions of dollars more in debt. The package passed in a 215 to 214 vote after a marathon push that kept lawmakers debating the bill through 2 successive nights. The bill would fulfill many of Trump's campaign pledges, delivering new tax breaks on tips and car loans. This will also boost spending on the military and border enforcement. It will add about $3.8 trillion to federal governments, $36.2 trillion in debt over the next decade, as per reports. All of the chamber's Democrats and 2 Republicans voted against it, while a 3rd Republican voted present, neither for nor against the bill. Another Republican missed the vote because he was reportedly asleep. What Trump has dubbed a big, beautiful bill now heads to the Republican-controlled Senate, where it will likely be changed further during weeks of debate. Once again, with us to discuss these developments from North America is Andrew Latham, once again, Professor of International Relations at Macalester College and Senior Fellow, joining us from St. Paul, Minnesota in the US. Andrew, thank you for staying with us. We've heard there some of the impacts of the bill. This was hotly contested in a, of course, House that is run by and led by the Republicans. Why was this vote so close, and what were some of those amendments that were made over 2 nights of discussion?
Well, it's a big, beautiful bill, to use the phraseology, but it's not agreed to by everybody. There are factions within the Republican Party, and some of them are really opposed to excessive spending. Let's put it that way. And other factions are really in favor of spending lots of money in favor of their constituencies. And then beyond that, there's the defense piece, right, which there's $150 billion added to the defense budget, which some Republicans are in favor of, but others look at that as like we're wasting a lot of money. So what I'm seeing here is real divisions, not between Democrats and Republicans, but within the Republican Party. And it's shaking out as it's going to shake out, as it has in the House, and it's going to shake out as it's going to in the Senate. But the idea that a lot of people outside the U.S., and even within the U.S., that there's a Democrat position and a Republican position is just not right. There are factions within the Republican Party that are disagreeing about some of the fundamentals of this big, beautiful bill.
Absolutely. Andrew, of course, we mentioned there more debts, but can you explain for our audience what the significance of that debt will be, not just for future generations, but also for the state of play over the next sort of 5 to 10 years?
Well, you know, the debt is in the U.S., as it is in Canada, as it is in Europe, as it is in a lot of countries. It's beginning to overwhelm budgets. Just paying off, right now in the United States, just paying off the interest on the debt is bigger than the defense budget, for example. And so you have various factions arguing about this. One of the through lines for this latest budget proposal, it's not been adopted yet, is to try to reduce the expenditure so that the debt doesn't go up. But the flip side of that is that there are factions within the Republican and especially within the Democratic Party that really want to spend a lot of money to elevate this cause or that constituency, and that's to use an old Marxist term, that's the dialectic that we're dealing with here. We in the Western world need to reduce expenditures in order to reduce the debt. On the other hand, we have constituencies that are really demanding a lot of investment in their causes, some of which are really noble. I don't have a problem with them. And how you navigate and negotiate that tension, that's really the elements, the essence of politics in the Western world. I'm not sure that the Trump administration is navigating it as effectively and efficiently and ethically as it should. But that's the dynamic that we're dealing with now in the Western world.
Andrew, one final question for you. Is it a simple case of this being passed through the Senate, or will there be any last-minute challenges to this big, beautiful bill, as Trump has put it?
If I were a betting man, and some days I am, and some days I'm not, I would say that the Senate will pass this, and President Trump will sign off on it, and we'll be stuck with the big, beautiful bill.
Andrew Latham, thank you ever so much for joining us there on a couple of topics, providing your insight. That is all that we have time for, but we will continue bringing you more of the latest breaking news from across the world.